Sports have always been filled with controversy, and many experts think it serves to boost attendance. Of course, controversies are nothing new for the UFC. Some may hate to see it, but we can't deny there's a bit of intrigue in seeing such incidents play out. In today's video, we'll be covering our top picks for some of the biggest controversies across UFC's long history. Let's dive right in. Starting off at number 8, we've got John McCain's attack on the company. Street fighting in a metal cage was meant to be a sport filled with controversies. Critics, especially during the early days, stated that if action wasn't taken, a death in the cage was pretty much guaranteed to happen eventually. Early UFC advertising didn't shy away from this possibility. Instead, it virtually boasted about the possibility, which feels like something that focused on the short-term gain over the long-term stability of the sport. Things really took a turn when Arizona Senator John McCain used the now famous words "human cockfighting" on national television in December 1995. This essentially marked the beginning of the end for the early UFC ownership group SEG. As soon as their respected senator started pushing cable companies to outlaw the sport, it became extremely difficult to gain television permission. People still defended the UFC back then, saying that viewers should have a choice of what they wish to see on their televisions. Ultimately, it ended up with the sport needing to increase its regulation, which caused it to grow and thrive. Up next at number 7, it's Randy Couture quitting. Back in October 2007, Randy Couture thought that he'd gotten most of what he wanted out of the UFC. Considering he'd won the heavyweight title thrice while managing to defend it effectively against Gabriel Gonzaga, that's not too surprising. Though the only thing he was looking forward to was going up against Fedor Emelianenko. Couture was interested in the match, but the UFC wasn't able to make it happen. Because of this, Couture announced that he was quitting while stating that Chuck Liddell was making much more money. This was despite Chuck being on a bit of a losing streak at the time. The news was no doubt shocking, but Dana White implied clearly that the company still owned his promotional rights and wouldn't give them up. A few weeks later, Couture stated in a press conference that he wasn't happy with his pay. He also explained that he'd be a free agent soon. But within just a few days, the UFC countered with a press conference of their own, and they outright revealed the numbers that the UFC star received as payment. The UFC stated that Couture had made around $3 million in 2007. This led to months of drama between the UFC and Couture, with the UFC star finally deciding to call it off by signing a new contract. On November 15, 2008, he made a comeback, but he was defeated by Brock Lesnar by TKO. The legendary fighter didn't get to hold the UFC championship after that. Moving on to number 6, we've got Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. In what is possibly his most controversial moment, McGregor flew 3,000 miles from Dublin to New York in April 2018 to go head-to-head against Khabib. Earlier that week, Khabib had been seen arguing with Artem Lobov. McGregor attacked the bus carrying the fighters, shattering a window that injured Michael Chiesa and others. Because of this, he was taken into custody. As many as 6 fights had to be canceled due to injuries caused by the incident, which fans definitely didn't like at all. Dana even went as far as to call it the worst thing in UFC history. Following the 4th-round submission of Conor McGregor at UFC 229, Khabib Nurmagomedov leapt off the cage and attacked Dylan Danis in McGregor's corner. Teammates of Nurmagomedov rushed to the cage to assault McGregor. There was chaos everywhere. Security got called and had to break up the fight, and as you'd expect, both the fighters ended up getting suspended. Following up on number 5 on our list, UFC 232 moving from Nevada to California after Jon Jones tested positive. Jon Jones is definitely one of the most influential and important players when it comes to the USADA. Jones was suspended for a year after testing positive for the drug clomiphene. This happened all the way back in July 2016. He later returned to win the light heavyweight championship back, but soon afterward tested positive again, this time for anabolic steroid turinabol. The debate surrounding the former 205-pounder had only just begun when he was given an 18-month suspension. Then, in 2018, Jones was allowed to fight once again and went up against Alexander Gustafsson in what was said to be the main event of UFC 232. but it was announced a few days before the fight that USADA had noticed an issue with Jones' pre-fight drug test. And because of this, the Nevada State Athletic Commission didn't provide him with a license. The UFC thought that moving the entire event to Inglewood, California was the best course of action instead of just delaying the fight. As you'd expect, the fighters and the ticket holders were all affected massively by this decision. It's tough to say if John was actually innocent, though the way that the UFC and USADA continued to showcase an ending amount of favoritism towards him definitely caused them to gain tons of criticism. Next, at number 4 on the list, the double tap. The double tap, also known as the Brazilian tap, is a move in modern jiu-jitsu where you try to escape your opponent's hold by putting in enough hesitation in them. Fighters do it while trying to weaken their opponent's holds, but they are often unable to convince the referee that they're really done. But in UFC 37, we actually got to see this strategy get applied for the first time by an American, and it worked. Former Olympic wrestler Matt Lindland and middleweight champion Murilo Bustamante clashed in a bloody ground fight in the opening round as they struggled to win the title. Bustamante executed an armbar to Lindland during the struggle. He then let it go when Lindland tapped, and referee John McCarthy stopped the fight. For a moment, it seemed Bustamante had won, but the dispute soon began. By claiming that he'd never submitted, Lindland was able to convince McCarthy, and so the referee made the rare decision to resume the action out of fear that he'd made the wrong choice. Then at number 3, we've got the time when Anthony Pettis sued USADA after cutting his hand at UFC 241. UFC competitors have been complaining to USADA about their anti-doping policies ever since they started in 2015. Most of these competitors had been a part of positive tests before, so we can see why they'd be against it. But for former lightweight champion Anthony Pettis, that wasn't the case. In January 2020, Showtime stated that he was suing the organization because of something that happened before his fight with Nate Diaz. Pettis was basically forced to provide a urine test before the fight began. The sample he gave initially was rejected for being too diluted. For a fighter who'd undergone weight loss and was rehydrating, this totally wasn't okay. As a result, he had to take another test barely an hour and a half before the match. He had to deal with the process himself because USADA protocol makes it so no one else is allowed to collect the sample. This led to Pettis cutting his right hand and needing medical glue to close the cut. Maybe because of the injury, Pettis ended up losing his fight against Diaz. At the number 2 spot on our list is UFC 151 getting canceled. Rumors about UFC 151 began quite slowly. There were people saying that it'd be canceled, but no official details had come out for a while. Dan Henderson, the top contender at light heavyweight in the UFC, was injured, but things didn't really take off until Dana White made it official. He claimed that there was no headliner because Jon Jones had refused to go up against Chael Sonnen as a replacement for Henderson. Dana was pretty direct with his comments and said that UFC 151 would be remembered as the event that Jon Jones and Greg Jackson killed. Most people agreed and immediately blamed Jones for its cancellation, though it had been proved that Henderson had been injured for weeks but kept silent about it. We suppose he was hoping that he'd be able to compete regardless. Ultimately, we don't think any specific champion was to blame for this, despite what Dana had to say. Finally, our number 1 pick, Brock Lesnar, being granted an exemption from USADA testing prior to UFC 200. Out of all the controversies across UFC's history, the one that's probably remembered the most is heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar making a surprise appearance in the octagon in the summer of 2016. The USADA-based controversy was so huge that it made its way into the UFC. The Beast incarnate hadn't been in a fight since 2011, though after just 3 rounds, Lesnar defeated Mark Hunt by majority decision. Events soon took a dark turn. In the lead up to the fight, controversy had already developed. It was revealed that Lesnar apparently received an exemption from the 4-month testing window that should have preceded the match. That's not really the case with other boxers who come out of retirement. The company argued that Lesnar had first retired many years before his agreement with USADA, and so a shaky rule was used to get past the whole situation. They didn't want to make him wait the extra 4 months, so he was given a new signing. Things got even worse though. Lesnar's post-fight drug test revealed that he'd used the illegal drug clomiphene. As you can expect, this caused the controversy to skyrocket. Many fans naturally questioned why the WWE star was even allowed to compete when it was found that one of his pre-fight tests was done 11 days before the fight. This came back positive too. Later, Hunt sued the promotion, Lesnar, and Dana White as well. He alleged that they were aware of the fact that Lesnar was using illegal drugs, but still allowed him to compete. The case was thrown out eventually, but it was still a terrible look for everyone involved. And that's all from today's video. Let us know in the comments section what other controversies you think should be on this list. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. See you next time. Thanks for watching.